I woke up with a start. I had overslept my 6 a.m. alarm. I had to get out the door as quickly as I could. I threw on my clothes in a bit of a haze, put on my jacket, my boots, grabbed my cart, and left to go and deliver the papers. I had to get it done before it was time to get to school. And so I walked the 5 blocks, still in a bit of a haze. And I got to the corner, but the papers were nowhere to be found. Of course, this is the kind of day where they're going to drop them off at the wrong corner. And so I walked the 2 blocks over, but they aren't there. Getting a little frustrated. You know, they're supposed to be there by 4:30 a.m. at the latest, and it was now sometime after 6. What had happened? I began to look down at my watch, only to be startled. It was 3:25 a.m. I woke up and assumed it had been my alarm that I'd slept in, and so I walked out the door following my routine before I even knew what had happened. I was already 5 blocks away from home. Just the same pattern I do every morning. Maybe you've had an experience like that, where you've done something just out of habit. It's your day off work, but you find yourself doing the same things and packing your lunch, even though you don't have to go anywhere. Or maybe you've had this experience where you were leaving work, and the next thing you remember, you're unlocking your front door. You look back at the driveway, and the car's there, but you don't remember putting your keys in. You don't remember putting it in reverse. You don't remember making all the turns to get home, but somehow you're here. You've made this whole journey without any thought. And then what's worse is now you remember you were supposed to grab milk on the way home from the supermarket, but by default, you just did what you always do. Research suggests that 95% of the things we do throughout the day, we do without conscious thought. We've formed habits. We've learned how to tie our shoes, how to drive our car, what to do at work, and so we're not even consciously thinking about it anymore. And yet, we go through the same routines that form us. That can be a little overwhelming and unsettling at times. You know, in today's gospel lesson, Jesus tells the story of the sheep and the goats. But we're often quick to jump to the conclusion about what he means by this story. We're quick to think this is a story all about doing things for Jesus, about feeding the hungry, about clothing those who are naked, about giving water to those who are thirsty. We get caught up in thinking we know what this is all about. It's all about doing things for God, about responding out of the grace we have received and now following this pattern of serving others in God's name. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not Jesus' point in this parable. His point is about the kind of people we become by our habits. See, every one of Jesus' parables has an unexpected twist, something that shouldn't be there, that doesn't really make sense. And as we get through this parable, we're reading through it, and Jesus begins to praise the sheep for all of their good works, for what they've done for him. But the sheep respond, and they're startled and confused. What do you mean we did it for you, Jesus? I wasn't doing this for you. I saw someone who was hungry, and so I gave them some food. I saw someone who was thirsty, and so I gave them a glass of water. I saw someone who was cold and out in the winter, and I had 5 extra jackets at home, and so I gave them mine, because I didn't really need it. I wasn't doing this for you, Jesus. I was doing it because I saw a need I could meet in front of me. See, that's the amazing point of this parable, is that the sheep just do the good works because it's who they are. They're not looking for a reason to do it. They're not looking to serve God by their good deeds. It's just who they've become, and so they've begun to do these good works. There's a lesson for us as disciples in this. See, we're not called to be driven by an obsession to do things for Jesus. We shouldn't be driven by this compulsion to try and do good works to make up for our salvation as if we could ever earn it. See, both of those will quickly lead into works righteousness, into trying to prove we're good enough. Rather, as Christians, we don't do good works for God as if he needs them. God doesn't need our good works. Our neighbors do. And we don't do things to try and pay God back for our salvation. We could never do enough. It would never be good enough. Instead, as Christians, we see the need of our neighbor in front of us, and we seek to meet that need plain and simple. That's what drives our good works. We as Christians are those who have had all of our needs met by God. We know that he knows everything that we need, and so we seek to provide for others. We're able to notice the needs of others around us. In this parable, in this story, the people who are driven by a compulsion to find someone to serve, a reason to serve, are not the sheep, but the goats. You can hear it in their question. You know, when they're startled that they hadn't done anything for Jesus. Well, Jesus, when did we ever see you naked or hungry or thirsty or poor? When did we ever see you in this condition and not help you? We were looking, we were watching for you, but we didn't see you, and so we didn't know we were supposed to help. See, they're driven by an obsession of looking for a reason to do something right. The sheep are those who just continuously do the right thing. They're the ones who, before they've thought about it, they're already doing the right kinds of actions. But how do you become like the sheep? See, that's the important thing for us to note as Christians in this story. How do we become like those who receive the reward, those who Jesus praises? Well, how do we become those kinds of people who don't have to consciously think and obsess over doing good works? It's simple. We practice the Christian virtues. We get in the habit of doing the right thing over and over again so often that it becomes second nature. It's just who we are. We don't have to think about it. We just do those kinds of things. They're the kind of people we become. See, the sheep are those who have been described and have done a lifetime of good works. They've been continuously practicing these things and training in them. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9, do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Like any athlete, musician, writer, or dancer will tell you, if you want to become proficient at a skill so that you don't have to think about it, you practice it again and again and again, so it becomes second nature. The reason Steph Curry can nail jump shots from all over the court is because he's spent a lifetime practicing it. He doesn't have to think about his form anymore. He just does it. It's as easy, as natural as breathing for him these days. And any musician will tell you the way that you become proficient at an instrument is by practicing the scales. You practice those chords, those scales, over and over again so that your fingers know where to go when you see the note without ever having to think about it. And so you can read the music without having to obsess over where your fingers should be. They naturally know where to go. Or maybe another example from daily life. Probably most of you have experienced this. When you first started trying to type on a keyboard, you had to look down and maybe you were pressing one key at a time. Maybe if you're really gifted, you had both fingers. But as you went through those classes or you learned to practice on the keyboard, you started to be able to type a little bit more and know where the keys were. And now you don't even have to think about what you're doing on the keyboard. You think the word and your fingers just know where to go. It's an ingrained habit that you have developed. Something that part of that 95% of what you do every day that you don't consciously have to attend to. Likewise, as Christians, we ought to be practicing the virtues, practicing the habits that make us more and more into the image of Christ, more and more like Jesus. See, we learn to serve the lost, the last, and the least of these because God cares about them. And as we form ourselves through habits, we learn to love and care about what God cares about. And so we just do these things. The sheep in this parable, they do the right thing without thinking about the right thing. They're not obsessing over, should I give this money? Should I feed this person who's hungry or who's thirsty? What ought I do? Before they've thought about it, before they've weighed the pros and cons, they've already done it because it's who they are. Those habits, those practices have become so ingrained that they just do it without thinking. It's just who they are as God's people. See, in the same way, we as Christians are formed by our habits. Good works don't save us, but the way we live reveals what we believe, value, and love. See, as Luther had put it, faith alone is what saves, but faith never remains alone. Faith is always accompanied. It plays itself out by the good works, by the way we follow Christ and seek to emulate him as we serve others instead of seeking to be served. See, we're transformed. Jesus, at the end of Matthew's gospel, commands us to go and baptize all nations, but he doesn't tell us just to teach them the right words. He tells them and tells us to obey what he has commanded. We have to put into practice the habits that form us into his kind of character. We have to be those kind of people who embody those kinds of things. And so, just as Jesus says at the end, or earlier in Matthew's gospel, make a tree good and its fruit will be good. Make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad. A tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For out of the overflow of our hearts, the mouth speaks. It's through the things we learn that we learn to speak and share with others what we have received. How we learn to act in a certain kind of way. See, it was through all of the days after days of getting up at 6 a.m. to deliver the papers, that habit that was so ingrained that I found myself 5 blocks away from home at 3 a.m. with no papers to deliver, because when I woke up, that's what I did. In the same way, when you drive home from work each day, you can find yourself getting somewhere without consciously thinking about it. It just becomes who we are. See, as we grow as God's people, our hearts are formed by our habits, by the practices we engage in. We learn what to love. We learn how to love. We learn who we're called to be as God's people. We're formed by the things we do. And so if we engage in the Christian virtues, things like compassion and mercy, charity, honesty, self-sacrifice, and love, we become these kinds of people who begin to look more and more Christ-like and serve others. Or if we engage in the vices of our lives, things like pride and jealousy, vanity and lust, anger and resentment, we begin to become people who are more self-centered, more selfish. We turn away and we stop caring about the needs of others. Whether vice or virtue, the things that you engage in on a daily basis will shape what you love and how you live. They form who you are. So Jesus' point in this parable isn't about how to be saved, but it is instructive in realizing that if you want to know if you are a sinner, saved by sheer costly grace, you can be confident if you have a sensitive social conscience and if you live a life poured out for others who can't pay you back. Because those who haven't been changed, who haven't heard the gospel, well, quite frankly, they don't care about others. They're either too self-centered to notice the others. They're worried about their own needs, obsessing about what they need to notice the last, the lost, and the least of these. They're only people who can be used for their agenda. Or you become self-righteous, and you think you're better than everyone else around, and they don't deserve your charity. They don't deserve your help. See, as Christians, we don't start there. We start with confession and humility. As we confessed earlier in today's service, we acknowledge that we are sinful. We come on Communion Sundays and we all kneel at the Lord's table, admitting that all that we receive, all that we have, comes from God. We come as beggars with nothing but our sin, our guilt, and our shame to offer, and in response, God provides for us. We receive his grace, and that transforms us. We don't serve out of a compulsion to try and earn God's favor or to do things for God, but because we see those people kneeling next to us and those people out in our community who have need of what we're able to give. And so we serve them. See, Jesus says that by this everyone will know that you are his disciples, if you love one another. So they will know we are his followers by the virtues we develop through our habits and daily practices. And on the last day, just like the sheep in this story, We will be surprised by the good things we've done because we weren't thinking about them. And we will be astounded as we receive by God's grace his favor. And we'll hear Jesus proclaim over our lives, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, and inherit the kingdom prepared for you." Amen.